Grayson's Grades. Scott Grayson, 97.3 ESPN.com. You also see him on Fox 29, Props and Locks Thursday nights as well. He's all over the place, and he was in Buffalo yesterday, boys, which was a miserable day in Buffalo. It was really a story. It was the story, though, of the game, I think. It was part of it anyway. It definitely played a factor. Scott Grayson was there, and, it played on television as pretty windy. But, Scott, give us a little bit more insight of just how much the wind played a factor on the field, which by my recollection, I've been there once. It's like in a bowl, very low into the ground. So when the wind gets in there, it really doesn't have any place to go, and it just kind of swirls around the bottom bowl there.
Yeah, that's exactly a great description of it. You're right, Mike. Everything does kind of sit down a little bit. So when you get your punts and your kickoffs up in the air more, then it obviously gets affected. The passes, if you kept them short and low, I don't think you saw as much of an impact, whether you were going into or against the wind. It was on some of those longer throws. I do remember Carson threw one about halfway to, I believe it was Zach Ertz. Suddenly the spiral turned into a duck. But, you're going to have some of that. Yeah, the weather certainly did play a factor. I think the wind more than any of the rain that came down at times. But, I think the Eagles did a good job of playing according to that. And also, for the first time really running the ball with effectiveness and really desire, I thought, out of the offensive line to pick the way. And the guys, Jordan Howard especially, just continue to get those 3, 4, 5, 6 yards at a time.
All right, well, let's take a look quickly through the report card because a couple of A's, the defensive front, Graham, Fletcher Cox, and the running backs, Howard and Sanders. I mean, really it seemed that the running game and the pass rush and then the ability to stop the run seemed to be the story.
Well, I'm going to start with the defense. The Fletcher Cox, really, to me, for the first time, he was effective early in the game. The first 2 drives for the Bills had Fletcher Cox's imprint all over them as to why they failed. He had the strip sack that the Eagles weren't able to recover, but it did bring up a punt, a 4th one for Buffalo. And then on the next possession, remember it was 3rd and 1, and Frank Gore, you're thinking, boy, he's going to get that. At least he should. And Fletcher Cox wrapped him up quickly and dropped him down, and once again they had to punt. So, some of these slow starts we've seen from the Eagles in the past, especially defensively, Fletcher Cox made sure that they got off the field on those 2 possessions. I thought that was really huge at that point when you're still, again, early in the game, you're trying to figure out how it's going to play out. And the Eagles were able to, for the first time in a while, go and get a lead, even though it was 3-0. And I thought that was huge. And then you talk about the running backs, and look, I think the weather forced Doug to rely more on the running game, which I don't think many of the fans are going to complain about for the reason that the results that we saw. And I just like the mix. Look, I would love to see more of the 2-back set. I've been saying this for a few years. I know he loves having his 2 tight ends out there, but I like when you have 2 running backs back there, and you're not predictive on it's not as predictable. And I think that it worked really well. Jordan Howard provided the huge block that really set Miles Sanders off and got him going on that 65-yard run. So I hope that they do a little bit more of that. And in fact, some of the conversations I had with Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey, they kind of liked that formation as well.
Yeah, by the way, Scott, Mike, Ryan, and I had a conversation about this, and we nominated you as the person this week to go try to break into Fletcher Cox's house to make sure that he's pretty fired up. As long as you don't go in the house, you won't get your brains blown out. But if you're just kind of like, no, I don't mean to make light.
Subtle.
It's just reading the 911 transcript, though. That was great. But seriously, you gave Doug Peterson a B, and we all talked about it today. I think maybe his hand was forced a little bit into the run by the elements, but I think we were all impressed by, at least when you have to run, some of the creativity, the Nelson Aguilar wing counter, as you mentioned, the pony formation, even using Boston Scott on the goal line there for a touchdown when he could have used Jordan Howard. Did you see that? Did you feel that Doug needed to be more creative?
You know what? I did. Let me answer that first. I think, yes, that he did feel his back was against the wall, just like the rest of the team this week. And as a result, what did he do? He went in and decided to pull out something we really haven't seen much, if at all, with that formation. I think, therefore, Buffalo didn't know what was coming. And, look, he scored a touchdown off of it, a big chunk play touchdown. That was huge at the time, too. I mean, it really gave the Eagles some breathing room. I think that when Doug gets pressed up against the wall, he starts getting a little more creative. I think he gets too complacent at times with some of the ways that the things go, week to week, and thinking, I don't have time to install new stuff. This past week, I think it was great. Now you get through Chicago, and then you get a bye. You're going to have to probably throw a wrinkle at New England So I think, it'd be nice for Doug to try to get a little more creative occasionally. I think that is one of his, strong suits when he doesn't put it in the back filing cabinet behind everything else he has to do as a head coach. You mentioned Boston Scott. Jordan Howard got dinged up on the play right before it, and at the time they had not yet announced it, but Miles Sanders was dealing with his shoulder. So that's why Boston Scott got to go in there in that particular spot, which was huge, and they needed it. And he ran the ball hard. I mean, I liked it. He did fine, and that's what they need. I mean, they need to be able to have that kind of depth. And Miles Sanders said after the game that he should be fine. They don't expect him to not be able to go. Jordan Howard was, of course, fine, loved having all those carries. So, it's nice to know that they have Boston Scott there if they need to go to him as a third back.
Doesn't it seem over the last few years like the Eagles have to have like a tenuous relationship with the outside, whether it's the media, whether it's former players, whether it's the fans booing them, in order for them to play their best football? It's a very weird and strange relationship and dynamic, I think, but it's proven over the last 3 years to be somewhat true.
I completely agree with you. When they become that caged or that cornered animal, and it's fight or flight, fight or die. I mean, they come out and fight, and it's a shame that it takes them getting to that point. Last year, it happened early enough in the season; they were able to get over it. You could say that the way that when Carson Wentz's injury went down and everybody counted him out in L.A. in 2017, that was a similar kind of adversity that they had to face. And now this year, everybody was ready to put them out on the curb with the trash, and they come out in Buffalo and they save their season for now. And I think really kind of, and I know we love talking about this, but I get in the locker room yesterday, music's playing. What I sensed was the big exhale, the relief of knowing that, and I think, quite frankly, the belief in themselves again. I sensed a tighter locker room than I had sensed. Now, sure, winning does heal all of that. But I sense the fact that this team maybe thought for a moment, this is who we could be. And I think they really needed to get that kind of momentum. And don't underestimate the importance of a win over Chicago for this locker room and that mentality to continue right into a bye week and then know that they have New England on the other side. I think that now, everybody said this was a must-win against Buffalo. I think it becomes essentially a must-win against Chicago because you really need to keep this thing going on the right track and can't afford to stub your toe again.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And Jeff asked you about Doug Peterson and his play calling and the creativity, that went along with it. So you gave him a grade of B. Another grade that fell under the B category was one Carson Wentz. And, I want your thoughts on how Carson played. 17 of 24, 172 and a touchdown. That's not going to, wow anyone if you're just looking at the box score, but I thought Carson had a nice game, particularly in the fourth quarter when he had to use his legs and basically will the Eagles to secure that win there. Not that it was that close, but a couple of big first downs on third downs with his legs to move the chains. But how do you think Carson handled the weather and leading this team to a win in Buffalo?
Yeah, in that kind of a day, you're likely not going to find somebody blowing up the box score at the quarterback position. And I thought what he did, though, was really didn't make mistakes, and that's all you need. You just don't want to turn the ball over. He did. I'd say the biggest mistake that he made was holding on to the ball a little too long at times. I thought his offensive line did a pretty good job this week, definitely much better than the week before in terms of pass protection. And Carson at times, I think, just kept looking downfield just a little too long. Did fumble the ball once, but was fortunate enough to be able to fall on it and recover it. But you look at what he did, and the two runs I think are what I take away to say that's what Carson needs to do more of. When he does buy time and get out of the pocket, if there is a running lane and you can only get, even if it's only 5 or 6 yards, go get it. It's a net positive play. Sometimes I think he tries to keep extending plays and trying to make this wow play, and sometimes that is wow enough. And yesterday, he went, I think one of them was 14 yards. Look, that's lethal to a defense. We've seen it. How many times?
There was the one too, Scott. Not to interrupt you, but there was the one on the broadcast that who called the game yesterday?
Moose Johnson.
Moose Johnson. He was adamant that was a called, designed run. And after the game, Peterson was asked about that very play, and he's like, no, he just, it was a screen play that didn't work. But those are the plays where, now Wentz is like, having that intuition of, all right, I'm just going to make something happen here, which was interesting because they were adamant on the broadcast that was a design play, and Peterson said, no, he did that on his own. So there was a couple of key plays in that game that Wentz made that kind of went under the radar. That was one of them.
Yeah, and he was coming up to the line of scrimmage and checking out of stuff too, and obviously checking into, for the most part, I thought good plays that he had to deal with. They've been on the road 3 weeks in a row. They've been dealing with not having crowd noise in their favor, and you have to do things silently and communicate well like that. And I thought all of that little stuff, it becomes big stuff, and they he did that pretty well yesterday. The running to me is something I want to keep an eye on because look, I don't think anybody wants Carson taking off and running a lot, but in key moments at right times when the opportunity is there and you can get those 5, 6, 10 yards, that's when he needs to use those legs and slide like he did yesterday. I think that's where Carson Wentz could really take the game to another level. And look, what happens as a result of that is the defense has to start honoring that. And to this point, they have not really had to worry about Carson Wentz running much. And I don't know if it's just he doesn't trust his knee yet or for whatever reason he's trying to just, I think, extend plays and look to do it with his arm downfield. And he just doesn't have the tools right now to really kind of do that kind of thing. So I was overall gave him a B, but I was really pleased with the game that Carson Wentz had, considering the situation, the magnitude, the pressure, and the weather on that particular day.
Now, that being said, what was it like in that locker room after the game? Was it a very business-like, like, we got the win, we expected to get the win? Was there a lot of we told you so's? Like, how would you classify the mood in there after that win?
There was a little bit of I think Brandon Graham just wanted to describe it. I know Jeff will get this. There was a little bit of as he's going into the locker room, the hairy eyeball given to the media, just kind of like, we knew we could do this. And there was some of that. I think there is a chip on this. What I sensed, like I described, was relief, joy, and also, I believe, a little bit of belief in themselves once again. I sensed a closer locker room that is ready to buy into each other and kind of have each other's backs, which I got to tell you, earlier in the season, I don't think that element has been there. Now, it was a win. It was a win on the road, and the question is, will they come home and carry that home with them? I think that, having won that game, they will have the crowd behind them. If they had lost that, I don't know what this crowd would have been like on Sunday at home. But, I think that this team, to me, is closer as a locker room than I've felt probably all season.
Scott Grayson, you see him on Fox 29. You read him on 97.3 ESPN.com. His Grayson's grades are posted. His locker room video interviews are posted. You can check them out. And, of course, listen for Grayson's grades every Monday after the Eagles game. And, of course, he did it on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, Scott.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's Scott Grayson, like all guests appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.